should read about that. Other things is now in many universities, like University of California, I'm sorry, the University of Los Angeles, University of California, Los Angeles, and California, Berkeley, is on the advisory board and chaplain in those universities, very prestigious universities. He has got about 56 invited lectures and 34 articles, 4 books, enormous amount of content in those books. And you'll be able to see today and tomorrow. He's going to sign the books, and the books are here. And the most attention-getting title for the book, Infinite Path to Infinite Reality. I never heard infinite path. I only heard 4 paths. That's very impressive. That title itself should attract people. Such impressive title. And first, the one lecture of Maharaj which struck me so well, I tell you, I cannot explain how much it is. It's ineffable. He gave a lecture on Vedanta for dummies. I said, here I am fully qualified to listen to the lecture. So it's things are made so simple. Our complicated philosophies is made so simple to understand. So with this, you please go ahead, listen to Maharaj. Best opportunity, especially the book signing, the best opportunity to see the books. And 2 glorious days, I told you at the outset, 2 glorious days, 29th to 30th. So please come, attend, and never miss any of the lectures. I think we are going to have future opportunities. This is only second visit. When it comes to repeated visits, I will not be even introducing. He needs no introduction. That's all his introduction. So with this, Maharaj, it's all yours.
Thank you. So are you guys all set, or should I wait?
We just checked.
Everything is good? There won't be chatter going on the whole time? Okay, thank you. Okay, that's good to know. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya Sarvadharma Swarupini Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again. I came here last summer in the extreme Texas heat, so I'm glad to be here in a more hospitable climate. I'll be talking today on a topic that's close to my heart. It may not be close to your heart, but I want to make the case that it should be. The topic is Sri Shankaracharya and Sri Ramakrishna, a tale of 2 Advaitas. It's a provocative topic and a provocative title. As Anandan or Anand. Anand. Okay, Anandji. As Anandji pointed out, I'm both a monk and an academic philosopher, and I've written some books on these issues. I've written philosophical studies of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Medhanandaji. This is the one on Sri Ramakrishna. I might be reading a little bit from it today. Okay. So I'm an academic, and so I do these things. You might say, well, how is it relevant to us? We're just plain old spiritual aspirants, bhaktas, devotees. But I want to make the case that philosophy is relevant to everybody. Not just that. I want to make a stronger case that each of us sitting here today is a philosopher. Either we know it or we don't know it, but we're all philosophers. We're either conscious philosophers or we're unconscious philosophers. That's the argument I want to make. What do I mean by this? How many of you, well, you don't have to tell me, but I'm guessing many of you are initiated in some tradition, some spiritual tradition. In Hinduism, what that often involves is mantra diksha. You're given a mantra. What does the mantra stand for? It's a name of God, right? Name of the ultimate reality. In the case of our tradition, the mantra is usually the Ramakrishna mantra, the mantra of Sri Ramakrishna. Who is Sri Ramakrishna? Isn't that fundamental to the practice? Surely it is. And yet that's a philosophical question. Is he a sort of temporary reality, a kind of figment of our imagination that we worship in a kind of dream until we wake up from the dream, which is true liberation? That's one view. That's actually the view of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Or is the personal God fully real? Sri Ramakrishna actually is an incarnation of God. God actually came in the form of Sri Ramakrishna between 1836 and 1886. And by worshiping him, we can attain the highest. Philosophical questions and philosophical answers are required to answer these philosophical questions. That's one example. But another thing that's interesting, if you just think about it, many of you are familiar with the scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. At the end of every chapter of the Gita, there's a colophon. There's a title of every chapter, and there's a description. The Gita is described using two words, Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre. It is Brahma Vidya. It teaches the highest knowledge of Brahman, the science of Brahman. And it's Yoga Shastra. It's a very profound Yoga Shastra, which means practical spiritual manual. But it's equally both. Because the idea is that these two things are inseparable. Brahma Vidya, teachings about ultimate reality, are inseparable from spiritual practice. Look at the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Many of you have read it. Many of you have whole passages by heart. Sri Ramakrishna could easily have just talked about sadhana, spiritual practice. But on almost every page, you find very, very lofty philosophical and spiritual teachings at the same time. Why? Because these great souls and the great scriptures, they all knew that philosophy is inseparable from spiritual practice. How? In Buddhism, the main spiritual practice is what's called the Noble Eightfold Path. And the very first step in that process is what's called Samyag Drishti, the right view, right understanding, having the correct worldview. That's the foundation on which you then proceed to engage in all the standard Buddhist practices like mindfulness practice and so many other things. Exactly the same is true of our tradition. It's true of any tradition. In any spiritual tradition, in any religious tradition, you have to have a clear understanding. On that basis, on the basis of that foundation, you can then practice to your heart's content. And unless you have that foundation, what happens? One Buddhist monk, Bhikkhu Bodhi, I believe, is the one who used this analogy. He says, otherwise what happens is, it's like driving, but without knowing what the destination is. You see, so you need a roadmap to know where you are now, what your destination is, and how to get from point A to point B. This is what philosophy gives us. It gives us a direction to our spiritual practice. Do you see what I mean? It tells us where we are now. It tells us where we want to get, the ultimate goal, and how we get there. All of these are philosophical questions, which are absolutely essential to spiritual practice. Another thing, followers of our tradition pride themselves in embracing all the different spiritual and religious paths throughout the world. Surely, this is one of the great teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, the harmony of all religions. We all know this. Jata mat tata path, he used to teach in Bangla. As many faiths, so many paths. But there are different ways of understanding his teachings on the harmony of religions. If we interpret his teachings on the harmony of religions from the standpoint of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, I think we end up narrowing him. Why? Because at the end of the day, the ultimate realization, according to Shankara, is the realization of our true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. It's impersonal, attributeless pure consciousness. Where does that leave bhakti traditions? Where does it leave those religious and spiritual traditions throughout the world? It could be Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It could be theistic traditions within Hinduism, like Vaishnavism and many others. People who worship Hanuman, Ganesha, Sri Ramakrishna, as a personal God, where does it leave them? Followers of Shankara have a ready answer. They'll say it's good. That'll take you part of the way. Worshipping the personal God will help to purify your mind. Then you have to practice our highest practice, which is Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. And then you can attain the highest goal, which is liberation, by realizing your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. But what I want to argue is that there's a broader way of understanding the harmony of religions, which is truer to Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and which is maximally universal. Because surely, if nothing else, our tradition aspires to be universal. So any whiff of narrowness we should be careful about. But I want to present to you these two different paradigms. That's why I call it a tale of two Advaitas. And I'll start with Shankara's philosophy. So here, there's a lot of controversy about what Shankara taught. And I don't want to get into all the controversies here. That would take up a lot of time. And I don't know at the end of the day how fruitful it would be. When we try to determine Shankara's philosophy, what texts should we rely on? When I was in training center in Belur, every monk has to go through a 2-year training center. We're taught the scriptures. And one very scholarly monk told us, in studying Shankara, the only authoritative texts are his commentaries on the Prasthana Traya. His commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra. Of course, many other texts have been attributed to Shankara. A number of devotional hymns like Mohamudgara, popularly known as Bhaja Govindam, and other devotional hymns as well. It's true that they're attributed to him. First of all, though, we don't know whether he composed them. There was no videotape at the time. We don't know. But secondly, even if he did, let's just assume that he did compose them. That doesn't solve all the difficulties. We know that he composed the commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra. We know what he says there about bhakti and the personal God. So even if he composed the devotional hymns, we still have to reconcile these things. What he says about bhakti and the personal God in the devotional hymns, with what he says about bhakti and the personal God in his commentaries, which are known to be his. And that's not an easy task either. Okay, so keep all this in mind. So since we know for sure that he composed the commentaries, I want to focus on how we can understand his philosophy on the basis of these commentaries. What does Shankara say in these commentaries? It's captured in a simple formula. The formula is not from the commentaries. The formula is taken from a later text, probably not composed by Shankara, but commonly attributed to him, called Viveka Chudamani, most likely written by a later Shankaracharya. But the formula is very helpful in understanding, in a nutshell, the essence of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmeva Naparaha. Brahman alone is real. Non-dual, impersonal, pure consciousness alone is true. Jagat Mithya, this world is an illusory appearance. Jivo Brahmeva Naparaha, and the individual soul, we, in our deepest essence, are none other than that non-dual, pure consciousness. It's a very sublime teaching. It's a beautiful teaching. It's very uplifting because it tells us we're not this body-mind complex. We're something much greater, much vaster, infinite, in fact. Each one of us is the whole of infinite reality. So it's a very inspiring teaching. But what does that say? What does this say about this whole world of names and forms? What does it say about each of us as individual souls, as struggling spiritual aspirants? What does it say about our beloved personal God for those who are bhaktas? Whether we think of the personal God as Christ or Hanuman or Ganesha or Sri Ramakrishna. Shankara says the following. Let's start with his views on the personal God. So I'll give you exact references in case you want to look them up. This is from his commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.14. 2.1.14. He says the following about the personal God. Thus, Ishvara's rulership, omniscience, and omnipotence are dependent on the limiting adjuncts conjured up by ignorance, avidya. But from the ultimate standpoint, such terms as the ruler, the ruled, omniscience, etc., cannot be used with regard to the Atman in its true nature, after the removal of all limiting adjuncts through knowledge. This is highly technical, and it needs a little bit of explanation and unpacking. What is Shankara saying? He's distinguishing two standpoints. The standpoint of empirical reality, otherwise known as the standpoint of ignorance, avidya, and the standpoint of ultimate truth. And what he's saying is, from the standpoint of ignorance, so long as we have not realized Brahman, so long is all of this true. It has provisional reality. All the different names and forms we see, there are many people sitting in the room today. Each of us is real in a certain sense. When we pray to God, that God is real, but only from the standpoint of ignorance, from the empirical standpoint, vyavaharika. All of these things have vyavaharika satta, empirical reality. When we attain the knowledge, the highest knowledge of our true nature as non-dual pure consciousness, what happens? It turns out, we realize then, that all of this turned out to be an illusory appearance. All of the names and forms, each one of us as individual souls sitting here on different chairs, false. All of our prayers to a personal God, false. We never prayed, and there was never a personal God we prayed to. It's called ajatavada. It means that this world never was. It's not that it once was and that it disappeared. It never was. Okay, so this is Shankara's teaching about the personal God. So what does he say? So he brings in another doctrine called superimposition, adhyasa. So the idea is this. There's only one truth, one reality. It's non-dual pure consciousness. That's what's true from the ultimate standpoint, from the paramatika standpoint. But due to ignorance of Brahman, we're constantly superimposing names and forms onto that non-dual pure consciousness. It's because I am ignorant that I'm mistakenly superimposing on a non-dual pure consciousness the upadhi, the limiting adjunct of microphoneness. This laptop is nothing but the same Brahman, but I am stupidly imposing on this non-dual pure consciousness the upadhi, the limiting adjunct of laptopness. I don't know who I really am. That's why I'm mistakenly superimposing on myself the illusory limiting adjunct of Medhanandatva. I think I'm a monk standing here. In fact, I'm not. There's only non-dual pure consciousness. This is Shankara's idea. Now, where does that leave the personal God? What he says is, that's what I'm explaining in this passage. He says, the personal God, Ishvara, is nothing but the same non-dual pure consciousness on which we have mistakenly superimposed theistic attributes like what? Omniscience, omnipotence, perfectly good, perfect goodness, and so on and so forth. You see, in reality, those are all illusions. There's only non-dual pure consciousness all along. Okay? Second, what about the status of this world? Is it real? Is it unreal? Something in between? Both? Neither? Another big controversy when it comes to discussing Shankara's views on the world. I think what I've heard in the past few years, I've heard several misconceptions about his views on the world. One of them is the following. Shankara never said the world is an illusion. He never said the world is unreal. What he said is that the world is not real independently of Brahman. The world has no independent existence or independent reality. This is one very common view of Shankara's philosophy. In fact, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, the former president of India and a very prominent philosopher, he used to hold this view of Shankara's philosophy. One of the big problems with it is, first of all, it's very difficult to justify on the basis of the textual evidence. But secondly, if you hold that view, there is absolutely no difference in Shankara's understanding of the world and any other school of Vedanta. Ramanuja agrees with Shankara then, Madhva agrees with Shankara then. There's no difference. And that the centuries-long debates between them they turn out to be pointless. They were all mistaken because Shankara agrees with all of them. It doesn't seem plausible to me. Second misconception, and I'll get to evidence. I know you, and I care about evidence, so I'll give you evidence, but just a second. Second misconception. Some people think, okay, Shankara, it's not that the world only has dependent existence, but he used to say that the world is anirvachaniya. It is indescribable either as real or as unreal. It cannot be described either as real or as unreal. That's the doctrine of anirvachaniyata. Okay? another common understanding of Shankara's view of the world. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, if you study his commentaries carefully, you'll find that the word almost never occurs. He uses it very, very sparingly. He uses it in very specific contexts, very rarely in his commentaries. In one place, he does say Sadasadhyam Anirvachaniya, but he means something very specific by it. And a later follower of Shankara named Vidyaranya Swami, he wrote a book called Panchadashi. And he explains exactly what it means from an Advaitic standpoint for the world to be anirvachaniya. Okay, so let me read to you. This is from 6.130, so chapter 6, verse 130 of Panchadashi. He says, this is not Shankara, this is Vidyaranya, but I think it nicely explains in what sense this world is anirvachaniya from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta. Tucha anirvachaniya cha vastavi cha iti asau tridha. Nyaya maya tribid bodhai shrauta yoktika laukikaihi. Vidyaranya says Maya, this whole world, is looked upon in three ways, from three different standpoints. He says, this world is fully real to the person to ordinary people who are ignorant, who don't know Brahman, who think of themselves as body-mind complexes, right? Vastavi. That's the word Vastavi in Sanskrit. Second, from the standpoint of logic, if you rationally try to understand the nature of this world, what do we arrive at? Through reasoning. We realize that this world is anirvachaniya. It can neither be described as real or as unreal. Who is the great Advaitin who proves this in the most rigorous way? Sri Harsha. Some of you have heard of him. He wrote a philosophical masterpiece called Khandana Khandakadya, where he proves if you just rely on reasoning, what you end up with is proving that this world cannot be proved to be real. It also cannot be proved to be unreal, anirvachaniya. But that's not the highest standpoint. Vidyaranya then says there's a third and highest standpoint. He says, this is the standpoint of the Shruti, Shrauta. Shrauta means Shruti, which means Upanishads. From the standpoint of the Upanishads as interpreted by Shankara, this world turns out to be tucha, totally unreal. Anirvachaniya is a kind of intermediate status of the world, only from the standpoint of logic. But once you ascend to the highest knowledge of Brahman, you realize that this world never was. Shankara's favorite analogy to explain the ultimate status of the world is, many of you know this, the rope snake. I'm walking on a street and I see in the distance something that looks like a snake and I become frightened. And then I look at it more and I realize it's not moving. So I come closer and closer. Then I realize as I come very close, I realize, wait a minute, that's not a snake, it was a rope all along. This is Shankara's favorite analogy for explaining this world. What does that analogy prove? The only reality all along is non-dual pure consciousness, but we are mistakenly superimposing onto that rope, onto Brahman, all sorts of false things. It's not that a snake had entered the rope for a brief period of time and then mysteriously escaped. There never was a rope. There never was a snake. There was just the rope all along. Likewise, Ajatavada. That's the doctrine of Ajata. This creation never happened. The creation itself is an illusion. This world never was. We realize that when we attain knowledge of our true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. Where does he say this? I'll give you one example among many. His commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.27. He says that this entire world of names and forms is, quote, conjured up by ignorance, avidya kalpita. That's the phrase that he often uses in his commentaries. Imagined or conjured up by ignorance. And he says that Brahman in its ultimate nature remains unchanged and beyond all empirical dealings. Paramatikena charupena sarva vyavaharatitam aparinatam avatishtate. This is the doctrine of, so I've explained Ajatavada. Vivartavada is a kind of kindred doctrine. They amount to the same thing. Vivarta, the doctrine of Vivarta. What does Vivarta mean? It means illusory appearance. The idea is that every school of Vedanta has to explain the relationship between Brahman on the one hand and this world on the other. And there are different ways of explaining this relationship. Some schools, Ramanuja, for instance, what do they claim? They believe in Parinamavada. This is the view that some aspect of Brahman actually transforms into this world, just as milk transforms into butter or curds, right? But there's an opposite doctrine, which is held by Shankara and his followers. It's called Vivartavada. This is the doctrine that, in reality, there is no relationship between Brahman and the world because there's no world at all. Brahman was Brahman all along, and this world only exists so long as we've not realized the highest truth of Brahman. But when we realize Brahman, what we realize is that the world never was. And therefore, there's no relationship between Brahman and the world. The world only appears to be real, but in fact is an illusory appearance of Brahman. This is Vivartavada. Now, what does Shankara say about spiritual practices? This is especially clear in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, because if any of you have studied the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find that the Gita talks frequently about the 4 yogas. It talks about Jnana Yoga, it talks about Bhakti Yoga, it talks about Karma Yoga, it talks about Dhyana Yoga, especially in chapter 6. Throughout the text, these 18 chapters, you'll find discussion of the 4 yogas. So Shankara has to explain what is the relationship among these different yogas, these great spiritual practices. And he says extremely clearly that only one of these 4 yogas is a direct path to liberation. You can guess what it is? Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. Yeah, exactly. So then the question is, where does that leave Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, for instance? Shankara will say these are wonderful practices for inferior spiritual aspirants who are not yet ready to practice the path of knowledge. What makes a spiritual aspirant inferior? Impure mind. So what's the purpose of Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga? To purify the mind and to concentrate the mind, to make you eligible to practice the path of knowledge, at which point you have to stop practicing Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. This is very clear in his commentaries. No such thing as the same spiritual aspirant practicing Jnana Yoga and Bhakti and Karma at the same time. That's called Jnana Karma Samuchaya. He rejects it. Other schools of Vedanta accept it. Shankara's school rejects it. He says that's not logical. Why? Because these different spiritual practices are meant for different grades of spiritual aspirant. Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are meant for inferior spiritual aspirants who have impure minds and who identify with the body-mind complex. And Jnana Yoga is for people with exceedingly pure minds who no longer identify with the body-mind complex, but identify with the deeper Atman within. You see, so Shankara says, so it's illogical for the same person to practice Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga because it's a contradiction. You either identify with the body-mind complex and you have an impure mind, or you identify with the deeper Atman within and you have a very pure mind, but you can't be both at the same time. So he harmonized the 4 yogas in terms of what he calls krama samanvaya. That means that, yes, all of these are valid yogas, but krama, which means there's a sequence to it. At the same time, you should not be practicing all of these yogas. So long as you don't have a sufficiently pure mind, practice Jnana Yoga, practice Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga. Don't practice Jnana Yoga. Once your guru says that, okay, now you have a sufficiently pure mind, now you can practice the path of knowledge, then you stop practicing Bhakti and Karma Yoga, and you take up the path of knowledge, and then alone do you attain the highest goal of liberation. So in a very simple way, we can say there's a hierarchy of yogas with Jnana Yoga at the top, because only that yoga leads directly to liberation. Now, the traditional schools of Vedanta have a field day with hierarchies. And so every different school of Vedanta, I talk about this in my Vedanta for Dummies lecture, the one that you enjoyed. Each one of them has a hierarchy of yogas, putting one yoga on top and the others below it. What do the Bhakti schools do? This is kind of an obvious question with an easy answer. Any guesses? What's the highest yoga according to Bhakti schools of Vedanta? Obviously, Bhakti Yoga. Yeah, exactly. Bhakti Yoga alone leads to liberation, the highest goal. Jnana Yoga is fine. Some schools say. It depends. Some people say Jnana Yoga is hopeless, Bhakti schools. But Vaishnavism, like the Achinta Bheda Veda school, Vallabha school, they say that, no. Jnana Yoga is also good. It's a lower practice. So it just turns the tables on Shankara. They've been playing these games for many, many centuries. Okay? Now, it's in this context that Sri Ramakrishna comes. God comes in the form of Sri Ramakrishna in 1836 recognizing that all of these disputes, debates, fighting, and in other religions, literally physical violence and killing, all in the name of religion, and I'm better and you're lower. Enough of all this. And he came to teach an even broader and more universal Advaitic philosophy. That's my contention. That's what I call, in chapter 1 of this book, his philosophy of Vijnana Vedanta. So in this tale of two Advaitas, I've just explained the first kind of Advaita. It's the classical Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya, Sri Shankaracharya, according to which non-dual, impersonal, attributeless, pure consciousness alone is real. Everything else is an illusory appearance. But that's not the only Advaita in town. There are many forms of non-dualism. This is something that many of us don't know. Some of you have probably heard of Kashmir Shaivism. It's a tantric tradition, equally Advaitic. What does Advaita mean? Non-duality. What does that mean? It means that the reality is one. There's only one reality. That's all you have to say in order to be an Advaitan. But there are different forms of Advaita, depending on your more specific doctrines. Classical Advaita Vedanta of Shankara is one kind of Advaita, but there are others. I'm not going to talk about Kashmir Shaivism today. If you have questions about it, we can talk about it. I want to talk about Sri Ramakrishna's Advaitic philosophy, his non-dual philosophy, which I call Vijnana Vedanta. In short, what I would say, so remember, the formula, the basic Sanskrit formula to capture Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. Brahman alone is real, the world is an illusory appearance, we are none other than that non-dual pure consciousness. I've come up with a Sanskrit formula to capture Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta philosophy. Brahma Shakti Satyam, Jagat Satyam. Simple. Brahma Shakti Satyam. Notice that first. See the first difference with Shankara. Shankara says Brahma Satyam, meaning Nirguna Brahman. This impersonal, attributeless, non-dual, pure consciousness alone is real. That's Shankara. Shankara says, I fully agree with you, Shankara, but don't limit the divine to just its Nirguna aspect. Never say that the divine Brahman is only impersonal and cannot also be personal. So Sri Ramakrishna says, in contrast to Shankara, in Bangla, Brahma o Shakti Abhed. Nirguna Brahman, attributeless, non-dual pure consciousness, is inseparable from Abhed. From what? Shakti, by which he means the personal God. He says very clearly in one place in the Gospel, when I think of the divine as inactive, nishkriyo, then I call it Brahman. When I think of that same divine as creating, preserving, and destroying this world, then I call it Shakti or Kali. Same reality, but in its static and dynamic aspects respectively. Shankara does not accept this. Anybody who studied Shankara will have to admit that. So it's a fundamentally different doctrine. It's different, and I think more importantly, it's broader. Because one of Sri Ramakrishna's fundamental teachings is you should never put a limit to God. Bhagavana kono iti nai, iti. Never say God can only be this and not that. And yet every traditional school of Vedanta has done just that. Ramanuja says what? Brahman is only Vishnu, Narayana. Madhva says the same thing. Brahman is only Vishnu Narayana, not Nirguna Brahman, and certainly not Christ and all these other things. What does Shankara say? Brahman is only Nirguna, impersonal and non-dual. Brahman is not ultimately the personal God. And they've been arguing with each other for a long time. Sri Ramakrishna says, I agree with you, Shankara. Brahman is Nirguna, but drop the only. Sri Ramakrishna will turn to Ramanuja. I agree with you, Ramanuja. Wonderful. I'm also a worshiper of Vishnu Narayana. But never say that God is only Vishnu Narayana. He's also so much more than that. That's the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta, is that he has a very expansive, universal understanding of the divine. The divine is illimitable. This is a term favored by Sri Aurobindo. He used pretty sophisticated English, and one of his favorite terms, if you just do a keyword search on illimitable in Sri Aurobindo's complete works, you'll find it all over the place. It's a beautiful term. It's a beautiful one-word rendering of Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, Bhagavana kono iti nai. You can never put a limit to God. That's Sri Ramakrishna's teachings about the ultimate reality. Never say that the divine can only be this and not that. So was Sri Ramakrishna just a kind of intellectual philosopher Was this a sort of a hypothesis cooked up in his brain? No. He directly experienced this. And he taught about this again and again. He distinguished two kinds of spiritual experience, which he called Jnana and Vijnana. He says that, imagine that you're trying to get up to the roof. How do you get up to the roof? By climbing the steps, the staircase, one by one. He likens that to the process of neti vichara. Not this, not this. Brahman is not this world. Brahman is not these chairs and this and that. Brahman is not my body. Brahman is not my mind. Until you reach the roof. Reaching the roof signifies jnana, what he calls jnana. This is the knowledge of your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness in the state of nirvikalpa samadhi. For classical Advaita Vedantins, at least for one major school of classical Advaita Vedanta, this is the acme of spiritual experience. This is the ultimate goal. This is liberation. Sri Ramakrishna says there's a further stage of spiritual experience, even beyond that. He says some people, after reaching the roof, realize that the steps are made of the same material as the roof: bricks, lime, and brick dust. He says that's the Vijnani. The Vijnani realizes, he says, that the divine is not just nirguna, impersonal, non-dual pure consciousness, but equally Shakti, saguna. And that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. Vijnani dekhe Brahma Chatubinshi tattva hoyechen. So instead of seeing this world as an illusion, the Vijnani sees that this world is nothing but God. The world is a real manifestation of God. You see, Brahma Shakti Satyam means that the ultimate reality is not just Nirguna Brahman, but also Shakti, the personal God. And because he accepts the reality of Shakti, he also accepts the reality of this world, Jagat Satyam, instead of Jagat Mithya. Why? Because this world is nothing but a manifestation of Shakti. And if Shakti is real, then it stands to reason that the world is also real. If you don't accept Shakti, then you also have to dismiss this world as unreal. So you see, in one formula, I think it really captures the metaphysical teachings of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. Now, what about spiritual practice? I talked about Shankara's views already. He has a hierarchy of yogas. He places Jnana Yoga at the top. He says this is the only direct path to liberation. What is Sri Ramakrishna's view? He says all four of the yogas can take you to the highest goal directly. He drops the hierarchies. Not that bhakti yoga and karma yoga are feeder disciplines or preparatory disciplines that make you fit to practice jnana yoga and then you reach the highest goal. No, he says you can reach the highest through bhakti yoga. You can reach the highest directly through karma yoga. You can reach the highest directly through jnana yoga or through dhyana yoga. That's the essence of his doctrine of the harmony of all religions, actually. He harmonizes all of the different religious paths, but without any hierarchy. You see the beauty of it. In long back in Shankara's time and in the time of these different traditional schools of Vedanta, they didn't really talk about non-Hindu religions. They were focused primarily on Hinduism and the different yogas within Hinduism. In the 19th century, when Sri Ramakrishna came, of course, the world was more globalized. The British were ruling India at the time. He was fully aware of Christianity and Islam. So you have to explain what is the relationship between Christianity and Islam and Hinduism and Judaism, Buddhism. There's so many world religions. How do they relate to each other? You see. And Sri Ramakrishna taught a very radical doctrine. All of these are equally capable of taking us to the same highest goal, which is the realization of the divine in some form or aspect. It doesn't have to be God realization in one narrow form. Not everybody has to realize God as Christ, like Christians say. Not everybody has to realize God as Krishna, as Vaishnavas say. Not everybody has to realize the divine as non-dual pure consciousness, as Advaita Vedantins say. But what Sri Ramakrishna says is because the ultimate truth, the ultimate reality is all of these things, realizing non-dual Brahman, realizing Krishna, realizing Ganesha, realizing Kali, realizing Christ, all of these are the realization of the same divine in different forms and aspects. That's the beauty of it. So it's every spiritual path has the same goal, but that doesn't mean that you're forcing everybody into a straitjacket and saying that everybody has to realize my understanding of the divine. No. Christians can realize their beloved form of God. Muslims can realize God as Allah. Vaishnavas can realize God as Krishna. Ramakrishnites can realize God as Ramakrishna if they want to, or Holy Mother, or whoever. Worshippers of Ganesha, they can realize God as Ganesha. And yet they're all reaching the same goal because they're realizing different aspects of the divine. And there's no hierarchy. Through their respective religious paths, they can attain the highest goal directly. So you see how, to me, this is the broadest possible way of understanding the harmony of all religions without any kind of talk of higher and lower. So now you might ask, I've presented to you in a nutshell. I mean, if you want details, please look at the book. Some of you might be interested in reading the book for more details. But the big question is, which Advaitic philosophy should we accept? They're both Advaitic. One is Shankara's classical Advaita. Another one is Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. Which one should we accept? That's up to you. Each of you should think for yourself. We can reframe the question to make it about me. Why do I prefer Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta? A few reasons. But first of all, just think about it just think about the broader historical arc of India's spiritual past, spiritual history. In the 8th century, Shankara, God, you can think of Shankara as an incarnation, in fact. God incarnated in the form of Shankara to address the pressing need of the time. He was combating, on the one hand, the Mimamsakas, on the other hand, the Buddhists, on the other hand, the Charvaka materialists, and he did an extraordinary job. This was the need of the time, the urgent need of the time. He didn't need to harmonize the world religions because there was not much of an urgency at that time. The world wasn't sufficiently globalized. In the 19th century, Swami Vivekananda says, sectarianism, fighting, violence in the name of religion became terrible. It grew to really terrible proportions. And Swami Vivekananda himself says, it was then that God incarnated as Sri Ramakrishna. It was then that God incarnated again in the form of Sri Ramakrishna to teach an even broader doctrine. Because these conflicts have become out of control, and we still see them. Last week, the terrorist attack on the Moscow concert hall, hundreds died, Gaza, all these things. Usually this violence is in the name of religion. How terrible. So God came again to teach an even broader teaching, an even broader philosophy that rejects any talk of higher and lower, so that everybody can live happily together. That's the ideal. Not that it'll happen overnight, but so long as we accept some narrower sectarian philosophy, we're always going to have a kind of superiority complex. They're good, but not as good as I am. That's the kind of thinking that needs to be gotten rid of. That's the idea. Another reason, this is a little bit more scholarly, but another reason why one might prefer Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta over Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta has to do with our great Vedantic scriptures. Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra. These are the 3 scriptural pillars of any Vedantic tradition. The problem is all of these scriptures have been interpreted in many, many different ways. Each of the schools of Vedanta claims those scriptures as their own. Shankara says, the Upanishads, Gita, Brahma Sutra, they teach only my classical Advaita Vedanta. It doesn't teach anything else. Ramanuja says, wrong, Shankara. These scriptures teach only my Vishishtadvaita Vedanta and nothing else. Madhva says, wrong, both of you. The scriptures teach only my Dvaita Vedanta and nothing else. Each one of them subscribes to, the technical term here is ekavakyata, which means the scriptures teach one thing and one thing only. If it teaches my doctrine, it cannot teach the other doctrines. Swami Vivekananda, again, he specifically refers to this doctrine of ekavakyata and says, this is the root of all sectarianism. And it leads to a distortion of the true meaning of the scriptures. Because he says, especially if you look at the Upanishads, especially look at Bhagavad Gita, what you'll find, if you're unbiased, if you don't have any preconceived notions about what's right and what's wrong, you'll find that the Gita is very happy praising bhakti as the highest path in one chapter, in one shloka. Equally happy about saying that you can reach the same goal through jnana. Equally happy about saying that you can attain the same goal through karma yoga. Karma neva hi samsiddhim asita janakadeyaha. Through karma alone, Janaka and others, the famous King Janaka, attained perfection. Clearly, Krishna is saying that karma yoga is also a direct path. And yet, Shankara and his followers have to interpret it indirectly. No. Through karma yoga, Janaka purified his mind. Then he practiced the path of knowledge. Then he attained the highest. Is it plausible? So what Swami Vivekananda says is, Swami Vivekananda himself was a great acharya. So he was able to use harsh language when necessary. What did he say? He said Shankara and all of the other traditional commentators sometimes tortured the scriptures to suit their own philosophy. Text torturing, he said. They were guilty of text torturing. Not all the time. Many of Shankara's interpretations of the scriptures are incredibly insightful. Many of Ramanuja's, wonderfully insightful. But each of them, because their main aim is to establish their own philosophical school, sometimes they had to distort the meaning of the scriptures. That's what Swami Vivekananda calls text torturing. In another place, in the Inspired Talks, Thousand Island Park, he used an even harsher term. He says, Shankara and others were at times conscious liars. Very strong language, but the same idea. They knew that they were, this is Swamiji's take on it. You don't think Shankara knew that Gita is placing bhakti on an equal footing as Jnana Yoga? Of course he did, but he also had the primary aim of establishing his own philosophy. So he had to twist the scriptures to suit his own philosophy. So this is Swami Vivekananda, don't shoot the messenger. So what does Swami Vivekananda say? Well, okay, so he says, we don't arrive at the original meaning of the scriptures by just relying on any of these traditional commentators, because all of them ended up torturing the scriptures at certain places. So what should we do instead? He says, we should reinterpret the Vedantic scriptures, quote, on an independent and better basis than by blindly following the commentators. And he says in numerous places, how do we do that? What's our best guide? We should interpret the Vedantic scriptures in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. In the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. And if we do that, one immediate question, this could be in the Q&A, but it's a question that comes up in anyone's mind is, well, wait a minute, isn't that another kind of sectarian interpretation? Now we're just putting on the Ramakrishna glasses instead of the Shankara glasses or the Ramanuja glasses. Isn't that distorting the scriptures in a different way? That was not Swami Vivekananda's intention. The idea is this. Swami Vivekananda, what he said is, if you just look at the Upanishads themselves, independently of any commentaries, if you just look at the Bhagavad Gita itself, independently of commentaries, what you'll find is there's a deep harmonizing impulse, non-sectarian impulse at the heart of these scriptures. It's trying to harmonize different spiritual practices, different views of the divine. Just look at the Upanishads. In many places, the Upanishads talk about Ishvara. In many, which is the personal God, creating this world. Bahusyam prajayayeti. This is found in some of the most ancient Upanishads. God decided, let me become many, and then he became many. Obviously, the creator God, personal God, projecting this world. The same Upanishads will talk about non-dual pure consciousness, like Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Neti neti atma. Brahman can only be described as not this, as pure consciousness. And you don't find any hierarchies there. So Swami Vivekananda's idea is, by reinterpreting these scriptures in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, it can help us to appreciate and truly understand the non-sectarian harmonizing spirit of the scriptures themselves. That's the idea. That's why I started teaching a class last year called Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. I think it's the first time a monk has done this. I'm not bragging, but I'm just saying most of us, even monks, when they teach Gita, they usually teach with Shankara's commentaries. But I'm trying to follow Swamiji because I think he's onto something. And if the monks don't do it, then who will? So at the end of the day, though, I want to mention one other thing. 6.11 of Shvetashvatara Upanishad. It's a wonderful and I think honestly an understudied Upanishad. Shvetashvatara Upanishad. I strongly recommend that you read it. Verse 11 of chapter 6 of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. I'll just read the mantra to you. Eko devaha sarvabhuteshu gudaha sarvavyapi sarvabhutantaratma karmadhyakshaha sarvabhutadivasaha sakshi cheta kevalo nirgunascha. This mantra is describing the nature of the divine, very much in the spirit of Sri Ramakrishna, in my opinion. What is it saying? Ekaha, Advaita. Non-dual. The divine is non-dual. So we get Advaita right off the bat. What kind of Advaita is it? That's the question. Eko devaha, so that divine is one. Sarva bhuteshu gudaha. it is lodged in the hearts of all creatures, but in a hidden way. That's why we're not aware of the fact that God is actually dwelling in our hearts, each one of us. Sarvavyapi, all pervasive. This entire world is a manifestation of Brahman. That's why one of the most famous mantras in the Upanishads is Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Everything is none other than Brahman. Every single name and form is a real manifestation, effulgence of Brahman. Sarvabhutantaratma means, and God dwells, the divine dwells in the hearts of all creatures. Then, next line, very interesting. Karmadhyakshaha. Karmadhyaksha means what? The karma phaladata. God distributes to us our karmic dues. We're all doing both good and bad things. As a result, we get papa or punya, and then that determines our circumstances in our next birth. Right? I mean, you need to be a mastermind. You need to be omniscient to be able to make sure that I get my karmic dues. I don't mess up and give you my karma and you see what I mean? It's very confusing. God alone can do it. So God, according to Vedanta, is karma phaladata. God alone is able to keep track of this all effortlessly, each one of these billions of souls, and giving just the karmic rewards or punishment that is due to us. You see. Karmadhyakshaha, sarvabhutadivasa, and dwelling in all creatures. Sakshi, now we get again something more like Shankara's classical Advaita. That same divine is described as the eternal witness. Beautiful. Cheta, Cheta is a beautiful term too. That which imparts consciousness to everything else. Again, highly classical Advaitic. Shankara would love those. Kevalo nirgunascha, and it is nirguna, and it uses the term nirguna, very much in the spirit of Shankara. But unlike Shankara, the Upanishad doesn't restrict the divine just to its nirguna aspect. It is equally karmadhyaksha, it's equally the supervisor of karma. It's equally the antaryami, the inner controller dwelling in the hearts of all beings. Do you see what I'm saying? So if we study Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in an unbiased way, carefully, trying with great concentration to understand what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, it can help us to appreciate the original, harmonizing, non-sectarian spirit of the Vedantic scriptures. That would be a second major reason why I would argue that it might be preferable to accept Sri Ramakrishna's broader Vijnana Vedanta philosophy. So I'll stop there because I'm sure that you guys have a lot of questions. There's a lot more I could say, but I'll save it for the Q&A. Thank you. There's a traveling mic, huh? Yeah, okay.
Anyone? May I ask you a question? Please do.
And tell me your name. I know I met many of you before, but I'm terrible with names.
Hello, Maharaj.
Yeah.
My name is Kanad.
Hi.
So my question, we met.
Yeah,
same
of course.
here.
Yeah.
My question is, you said that for Sri Ramakrishna, all of the four paths are equal.
Yeah.
But maybe if you look at his life, though, to me, it might seem like for him, he first really was following the path of bhakti before he embraced those other paths. So for him, would it be possible to say that indeed he did purify himself through bhakti before he could?
Of course. But that doesn't make the path objectively higher than the others. It means that's his preferred path.
I see.
So the idea is you pick the practice that best suits you. Just because I like spaghetti and you like Thai food, that doesn't make Thai higher or better than spaghetti, right? You like it and I like it. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna used to say, imagine God as a kind of mother who's cooking the same fish, but in 5 different preparations to suit the stomachs and preferences of her different children at different stages of development. It's a matter of temperament. It's a matter of preference rather than about objectively, this is higher or better or more direct than the other paths. That's the idea. Does that help?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, please. And I've met you before too, but I forgot your name, so please remind me. I'm sorry.
Swamiji, my name is Shaunak Raichaudhary.
Shaunak,
And so I have this, what do you call, this curious thing in me. So I'm just wondering that we have the principle of Jyotamot Datapat.
Yes.
Now in Bhagavad Gita, you have actually 4 pathways. They have been elaborated. And
there are probably
about.
more, but yeah.
So I'm So I'm wondering if there is a short pathway to any of them, like, or they're what you call equally long. Means, for example, if I just try to bring an analogy from a computer program, so I can say that to solve a particular problem, I can have a smaller algorithm and I can have a longer algorithm or an inefficient algorithm, right? So is there an efficient path to get to realization of God?
Great
apart
question,
from these
but the
four
answer is
questions?
depends on the person.
Okay.
Because what is the most efficient path depends on the temperament of the individual person. Think about this. I want to get to the roof of a house. There's a staircase, there's an elevator, there's a rope. Somebody who's extremely adept at rope climbing, who has very strong upper body, they can climb the rope in like 3 seconds. For that person, the most efficient, fastest path might actually be the rope climbing. But just imagine, just stipulate, 99% of people don't have that upper body strength. So if they try to climb on the rope, they'll fall flat on their face. They'll keep trying, failing, trying, failing. For them, that's not. But for those people, what is there? The elevator called Bhakti Yoga. The beauty of it is, you go into the elevator, you push a button, it takes you up to the roof. Just again, stipulate. It could take you 2 seconds, 1 second faster than the incredibly strong rope climber guy. You see what I mean? Which is more efficient? Or it could be 3 seconds. We can also say that they're both 3 seconds. Fine. You see. So the point is, it's not. And so in Gita, in chapter 12, another thing is, Arjuna asks this question. He says, which is superior? The follower of the path of knowledge, or the one who worships you, O Krishna? And Krishna says, both are fine, but my devotee is better. And he says, why? He says, kleshodikatarastesham avyakta saktachetasam avyakta hikati dukkham dehavad viravapyate. He says that path is harder, the path of knowledge. Why? Dehavad viravapyate. Because, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, in this Kali Yuga, onnagata pran, people have tremendous body consciousness. They instinctively identify with their physical bodies. As a result, the path of knowledge becomes almost impossible for the vast majority of human beings. Krishna understood this. And Sri Ramakrishna, in a much later age, reiterates the same thing. He doesn't say that bhakti is higher than jnana. He says, for most people, the best path, realistically speaking, is the path of bhakti, because it's universal and because it's not a slower or less efficient path. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
But it's more universal. These days, there's a new trend called Neo-Advaita, which means people read a couple pages of Ramana Maharshi's teachings and then they think that they've realized Brahman. This is very common. I heard this in my own experience. I finished my PhD 2009, and then I bought a one-way ticket to India because I wanted to be a monk in India. So I moved to India with my guru's blessing, Swahanandaji. And I did a 6-month pilgrimage, Tirtha Brahman, throughout India. And I made a stop in Kodaikanal because I knew someone there. It's a beautiful place for sadhana. I went there. I walked into a bakery, and there's a lady there who presumably owned the place, a middle-aged woman. And I was wearing this kind of clothes, but in white, because I wasn't yet a sannyasi, but on the path. She looks at me. She says, oh, what do you plan to do? I said, well, I'm going to join the Ramakrishna mission in a few months. I want to be a sannyasi. And she gave me this smile, and she said, oh, why go to all that trouble? I'm a follower of Ramana Maharshi, and he taught that we can just dive into the Atman. So why don't you just dive into the Atman? Why take the trouble of renouncing and going into spiritual practices and this and that? This is Neo-Advaita. This is Neo-Advaita. And it's very dangerous. And Sri Ramakrishna says, this is also in the gospel, he says, if you're a Neo-Advaitan who doesn't have the spiritual prerequisites, what's called sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold sadhana, tremendous dispassion toward everything in the world, worldly attachments and pleasures, tremendous vichara, viveka, discrimination between what's real and unreal, what's permanent and impermanent, all the wonderful spiritual virtues, shama, dhamma, which means self-control, control of mind, control of senses, tremendous mumukshutva, intense longing for realization. You're not qualified to practice Advaita Vedanta. Shankara said it emphatically in his commentary on the very first sutra of the Brahma Sutra, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Sri Ramakrishna said it just as emphatically many centuries later on the basis of his own personal experience. Why? Because one day in Dakshineshwar, a Swami comes from a different part of India, not outside of Bengal. Sri Ramakrishna hears something funny about it. Not funny, but disturbing. he hears that this sannyasi, who's supposed to have taken a vow of celibacy, is having an illicit affair with a woman. Sri Ramakrishna is very bold and forthright, so he approached this sannyasi. He said, hey, what does this I hear about this woman that you're having an affair with? This monk was not in the least bothered. Let me explain. Just like this lady, not saying the, but the baker, let me tell you this. Simple. He said, you see, everything you see around us, Maya. So how can my affair with this woman alone be real? This is the reason. This is Neo-Advaita to a T. Now comes an interesting translation issue. For those of you who know Bangla, have the privilege of reading Sri Ramakrishna's response in the original language. But let me first tell you what the watered-down translation is. Chaitanandaji and others who have translated. This is from the Lila Prasanga. It's the Sharadanandaji's biography of Sri Ramakrishna. In the censored version, Sri Ramakrishna says, I spit on your Vedanta. So what could be worse than spitting? The original is, Tor Vedanta mute di. I piss on your Vedanta. That's strong. That's the danger of thinking that we can easily deceive ourselves into thinking that we're qualified for Advaita Vedanta when in fact we're not. And we short circuit our own spiritual progress. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Nije ke thokai, onno dero thokai. We not only deceive ourselves, we deceive others. We do gurugiri. We start becoming a guru to the world. It becomes very dangerous. I gave a whole lecture on the topic of self-deception and spiritual life. Some of you might have seen it a few months ago. And that's one of the main things I talked about. Thank you. That's a wonderful question.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
please. I don't think I've seen you before. So tell me your name. Did we meet last time? No, right? Okay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. My name is Siddharth. This is going to be hard to get out, but so when you phrase things like we're in this position and we follow sadhana and we'll get to this position, to me, like it kind of sounds like this is like a training arc. Like I don't know if you know about anime.
What trading arc?
Training.
Training arc.
Like in like an anime, for example. You know, like anime,
I don't know anything about anime.
Anime television, or like I'm a basketball player.
Although there's one anime that's named after me, or my old Aeon Flux, I guess there's something.
Unfamiliar,
Okay.
unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Or like I'm a basketball player and I go to the gym every day and I'm just shooting 3-pointers.
Yeah.
So when you're
You
framing
get them
things,
in?
Maybe I
You're
do.
pretty good, huh? Okay,
I'm
all right.
pretty good. Yeah. So when you kind of phrase things like there's these different paths and we have a certain starting position and then there's an ending position.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like it's like an optimization problem. And like maybe if you were born in like a Ramakrishna mission family in Kolkata, or maybe you're
that might be optimal or something.
or you're born as
For
a
you.
monk, you'd be optimal, and maybe you're already born like as a child monk or something. Exactly. So I guess my question is this sort of an incorrect framing? Because this is kind of what I feel like when you have these different paths and like you're choosing, it kind of lends itself to that. In the way I
followed you until you asked the question, because I'm not. What is the this here? Is it the way I've been presenting things, or do you mean
I'm asking, is this correct?
hierarchical kind of thinking? Sorry.
Is it correct to think of, I guess, these different paths as sort of like the more hours you put into it, the more like the more you can realize it. Is it, you know, effort in, quality out, like answers out?
Okay, I'm not. I almost feel like you're asking two different questions, but what I understood you saying in the first part is that for different people, different practices are optimal. And what I would add is that's because of karma. Because what we did in our previous lives determines our circumstances in this life. So if we did tremendous Vaishnava sadhana in a previous life, we will most likely be born into a Vaishnava family if we didn't succeed in realizing Krishna in our past birth. We come back as a yoga prashta. That's a term used in chapter 6 of the Gita. Right? But for somebody else who was a Christian monk, let's say, in a past life, but didn't attain the highest goal, what happens? They'll be reborn as probably a Christian. Why? Because they already have a tremendous number of samskaras that are leading them in a particular direction. So they're already geared toward it. Their minds, their hearts, their prana, everything is already primed in that direction. So why would you suddenly, it would be like a stillbirth if you suddenly in the next birth, you made him be born into a Hindu family or something. Do you say that? But that's the first part. Then I didn't quite understand the second part, but yeah, of the question. But
That did answer the first.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was, I guess I did have
So
two
if you want
questions.
to rephrase or kind of try to clarify the second part of what you were asking, you can try now. Or we can open it up and then we can come back to you later. It's up to you. Okay, let's come back to you.
Yeah.
Think about it more.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to you. Okay, yeah. Please take the mic first and tell me your name.
I think I'll go right with the okay.
Some people are shy with the mic. Don't be shy.
No, I thought
I
so.
once was, but now I'm shameless.
All right.
Okay.
Swamiji, I thank you for provoking for good,
Mm.
or among many goods.
Mm.
So it was provoking one.
Mm.
And my question, or what I'm thinking about, is really that when Shankara, Adi Shankaracharya ji, when he started preaching about whatever, Advaita,
Mhm.
at that time he has nothing to compare with,
Yeah.
because all acharyas happen later,
Yeah. Yeah.
much later. Now, when he is talking about a lot about Jnan marg, knowledge,
Jnana, the
path of knowledge,
yeah.
path of
Mm.
knowledge,
Mm.
then one aspect at that point in time in India,
Mm.
I think Buddhism was kind of a lot
I
spread.
mentioned that Mimamsa, Buddhism, all these things.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Buddhism was there, which
Of
is
course
not
it was, yeah.
not at all right now, almost.
Mm.
But it was there. So let's say karma, path of action, karma yoga, or path of bhakti or devotional path, those are embedded into almost with the people and with Buddhism. Whoever I'm following Buddhism, I
Well-
have karma and I have probably, let's say, devotion.
Buddhism
With the Buddha.
typically doesn't have devotion. I mean, maybe in the later forms, but in East Asia, but not really in the original form.
Now probably you can see it.
Of
We
course
can see
now,
it.
but yeah.
Yeah. So my question or my thinking,
Mm.
just to share with you,
Mhm.
really, is that at that point in time, the
Mm.
time demands for the really knowledge. What is Vedas? What
Mm.
is Upanishad? What
Mm.
is Bhagavad Gita?
Mhm.
Knowledge.
Mhm.
So a person, the young age, like your age,
Mhm.
is just going every corner of India,
Yeah.
establishing four
Sure. Mathas and all that. Yeah.
right,
Mm.
4 locations. I don't know whether he got a helicopter or not, but how he did, I don't know.
Yeah.
Within that short age,
Yeah.
but he did it, and the knowledge was probably required of maybe
Yeah. But I hope I said exactly that. What you
Yeah.
just said, I think I said that.
right. So
And-
he
but-
probably he might not have in mind to say
Yeah.
that this is Lord, and
Well, but he said it.
What
So-
need.
Yeah, but the problem is he did say it. And so that's where I think a lot of people who say that Shankara didn't say that, then when I say evidence, they become quiet. That's the problem, is that just prove it. Show me where he says it in the commentaries. What he says is higher and lower, hierarchies. That was the need of the time. You can say that. I have no problem with that. But yada yada hi dharmasya glani bhavati bharata abhyuttanam dharmasya tadatmana srijamyaham. Gita says, Bhagavan Krishna says in the Gita. Every time there's a decline in righteousness and an increase in unrighteousness, what happens? God incarnates again. He didn't incarnate once, he incarnated many times. Every time God incarnates, there's something unique and special about that incarnation. There was something unique and special about Buddha. There was something unique and special about Rama. There was something unique and special about Christ. There's something unique and special about Krishna. And there surely is something unique and special about Sri Ramakrishna. And yet, many of his followers don't grant him that originality. They don't grant him that specialness, that uniqueness. Do you really mean to say that God came again in human form just to pour the same old wine in a new bottle? Why aren't we willing to grant that he said something new, something more expansive, something broader and more universal than any of the past acharyas? At least that's my faith. Yeah, lots of questions. Good. Okay, first here, and then we'll go to the back of the room.
All right.
Yeah, and tell me your name.
Thank you. Maharaj, my name is Meera. Maharaj, so it's kind of like two-part questions as I'm thinking through this. So you know where Swamiji says, at heart, I'm a bhakta, but outside I'm a jnani.
Yeah.
And he says that about Thakur, the other way
Opposite,
around,
yeah.
opposite. And somewhat related to that, in the context of all this, what's Holy Mother's, where does she sort of what's
Stand.
her philosophy?
Yeah.
And I think she is a greater harmonizer, if I can say that, than even both Thakur and Swamiji, my small point of view. So I'm just curious about what do you think about what's
Yeah, that's a
her-
great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So watch my lecture called Holy Mother Sharada Devi as a Philosopher. I gave a lecture in Sarvapriyanji Center a year or two ago, and I explained this. She basically, I argue, but it requires argument and evidence. And so different people, intelligent people can disagree about this. But I think that she followed Vijnana Vedanta and that she taught an understanding of God that's very, very broad. But she did also say Thakur Advaita, that Sri Ramakrishna was Advaita. So I give a separate lecture on this if you're interested, a Sunday talk in Hollywood called Sri Ramakrishna is Advaita. And what I explain is She didn't say Sri Ramakrishna was a follower of Shankara. What she said is that Sri Ramakrishna is Advaita. He is the non-dual truth. He is the non-dual reality. And as I've just explained in the course of this 1-hour talk, there are different ways of understanding Advaita. So when she says Sri Ramakrishna was Advaita, it could easily also be interpreted as the Advaita philosophy of Vijnana Vedanta. Equally one reality. There's nothing but Brahma Shakti. And if you look at all of her teachings comprehensively, you look at Sri Shimad Kotha and these other places. Of course, we don't have any one gospel in the way that the Kathamrita, it's a giant, 1,200 page tome with stenographic accuracy recording Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. You don't get the equivalent of that with Holy Mother, because many of the people around her were women who could either not write or record things. And frankly, because many, she would spend most of her time with other women, which means 98% of her teachings are lost. This is unfortunate, but true. We can't pretend that we have as direct access and as full access to her teachings as we have to Sri Ramakrishna. Now, as for this interesting point you raised, that she was in a sense a greater harmonizer than Sri Ramakrishna Swamiji, I'm not sure that, I don't think we should get into the game of higher and lower again, because I'm not sure that's productive as followers of this tradition. I think a better way of thinking about it is this, at least this is my take, and then we can talk about it. I see Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda as giving the philosophy, the underlying philosophy, which explains how all the different spiritual and religious paths can be harmonized, how they can be direct paths, equally valid paths to the same goal. Holy Mother was not so interested in the philosophy, but she exemplified in her own life in a very, very beautiful way the harmony of all paths, and the harmony specifically of the 4 yogas, in a way that even Sri Ramakrishna arguably had not, because this is something that Premananda ji used to say. He said, Sri Ramakrishna, he was with him constantly. He was one of the few people, Sri Ramakrishna, there are very few people who could touch in high spiritual states. One of them was Babu Ram, his beloved Babu Ram, the future Premananda ji. So Premananda ji would see him in close quarters, always soaring into these transcendental states of samadhi, where he would lose external consciousness. Premananda ji then says, you know what Holy Mother's greatness is? That she could prevent herself, restrain herself from soaring into the transcendental states in order to engage in karma yoga to help poor suffering humanity, and to cut vegetables, and to look after her crazy niece, Radhu. Things that Sri Ramakrishna could not possibly do. He couldn't even walk to the carriage without having his being held by somebody. This is Premananda saying, in one sense, Sri Ramakrishna, that Holy Mother is greater, in this respect, that she embodied the perfect synthesis of the 4 yogas. Perfect karma yogi, perfect bhakti yogi, perfect jnana yogi, perfect dhyana yogi. She said about japa when somebody asked her, she said, you should repeat God's name just as you see the second hand in a clock. And she said she used to do 100,000 repetitions of the mantra. How could she do that in the midst of all her activities? Because it was ajapa japa in her case. The mantra japa repetition sank to the level of the unconscious. She doesn't have to consciously repeat. With a conscious mind, she's talking, she's consoling, she's doing a million things. Unconsciously, the mantra is going on, even in sleep. So anyway, that's one way of thinking about what you said. Thank you for that. There's a question back in the corner. Yeah, but go ahead.
Maharaj, you asked me, in Kashmir garden, Swami Vivekananda was thinking within himself, let this man say now he's an avatar.
Then I will believe him.
Yes. Then he gives the answers, what is Rama and Krishna is
He who
this
is Rama
body.
and Krishna is now Ramakrishna.
Not in your Vedantic sense.
yeah.
So will you please clarify that?
It's a wonderful question. Many monks have the same question, actually. It's very. And what did he mean by that? I think what he means is Sri Ramakrishna had a much better understanding of Vedanta, traditional schools of philosophy than we grant him usually. Because even though he didn't study these books in that sense, many great pundits would come to him. And he said, I can understand Sanskrit. I can't speak Sanskrit, but I can understand Sanskrit. So these pundits would be reciting from Bhagavata, from the Upanishads, from the Brahma Sutra. He had a personal copy of a book called Muktiyotaha Shadhan. Bipin Bihari Ghoshal is the name of the author. It's very interesting. We published it through Udbodan, if you're interested. He kept a copy. He kept a copy of the Bible. He kept a copy of Ashtavakra Samhita, a very high Advaitic text. And he kept a copy of Muktiyota Shadhan by Bipin Bihari Ghoshal. And it's arranged topic-wise. One topic will be Ishvara. And what it does is it compiles different scriptures in Hinduism and what they say about that particular topic. And it's a very eclectic compilation. It's got Not just Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra, not just these Vedantic scriptures. It's got a lot of classical Advaitic texts, Panchadashi, those kinds of texts. It's got Mahanirvana Tantra. It's got Tantric Shastras. It's got so many different kinds of texts. And Sri Ramakrishna became acquainted with all of these different scriptures, you see. So he was aware of the different schools of Vedanta. That's why in the Gospel, he's effortlessly talking about Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita Vedanta, Tantra, Shaktism, Vaishnavism. He knew everything. Because whatever he heard, he remembered for the rest of his life. And he could teach it on the basis of his own experiences. Now coming to your question. He who is Rama and Krishna is now Ramakrishna in this body, but not in your Vedantic sense. First of all, your Vedanta. Why your? He could have said in the Vedantic sense, but he says your Vedantic sense. You see, Swami Vivekananda was leaning toward classical Advaita Vedanta. According to classical Advaita Vedanta, this is Shankara's school. This entire world of names and forms is only true from the Vyavaharika standpoint, from the empirical standpoint. What does that say about the incarnation? When God incarnates in human form, what does human form mean? In a physical body. Sri Ramakrishna inhabited a physical body for 50 years, from 1836 to 1886, right? Classical Advaita says that's only true from the empirical standpoint. It's like that snake. In fact, there was never a snake. There's just the rope all along. God, in reality, never incarnated because there are no physical bodies. And another thing is, to give a clue as to what Sri Ramakrishna what he meant by this, not in your Vedantic sense. In the Gospel itself, Girish Ghosh debates with Naran, the future Swami Vivekananda, about whether it's possible for God to incarnate in human form. And Naran's position is a very interesting one. What he says is, each one of us is an incarnation. Every single one of us is an incarnation, or nobody's an incarnation. And Girish Ghosh says, no, but there's a special manifestation of the divine in certain people. That's the avatara. Sri Ramakrishna sides with Girish against Naran. And Sri Ramakrishna again and again says, what is the definition of an incarnation? He says, the divine is present in everyone. He tells us the Vidyasagar. He says, Shakti is manifest in everyone, but to varying degrees. Shakti Bishesh. Shakti Bishesh. And the maximal degree of manifestation of the divine is in the avatara, in the incarnation. That's Sri Ramakrishna's teaching. That is not consistent with Swami Vivekananda's young view, which is in line with the classical Advaita view. We're all incarnations. In what sense? Each one of us is the whole of non-dual pure consciousness. You are just as much non-dual pure consciousness as I am. There's no difference in degree. You are the whole 100% of non-dual pure consciousness. I'm also 100% of non-dual pure consciousness. And at that point, then the idea of an incarnation becomes irrelevant, you see. Each one of us is Brahman. Jivo Brahma Vinaparaha is the Sanskrit formula. In that sense. Sri Ramakrishna says, I'm not saying it in that sense, in your sense. Jivo Brahma Vinaparaha. There is a special highest degree of manifestation of the divine in a particular human body when God incarnates in human form. That's what I am. That's what Krishna was. That's what Rama was. Thank you.
Well, if I can ask a couple of more questions.
Yeah, but we should give the guy at the end a chance because he has had his hand up for a long time. And then we'll come back to Rajendra. He's hiding in the corner.
Sure.
And I have sympathy for him. Okay, so after him, her, and then we'll come to Rajendra.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
So I'm Rudra.
Rudra,
and,
hi.
Yeah. So I had a few more questions too. So I
Okay.
think, so the first one is maybe a little bit different tone.
Go from best to worst. So best question first. No pressure though.
Or maybe from general to more
Okay,
specific. All right. Do you think the understanding that we have about the world in modern science, like the equivalence of energy and matter, how does that are there any fundamental does that in same realization along what Sri Ramakrishna said, realization everything is same, and what is your thought on that one?
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, look, we're in treacherous territory when we try to. I think that the danger here is we're too quick to say that what modern science is proving is exactly what Vedanta is teaching, and we become unrigorous on both sides. We're not particularly good scientists, nor are we particularly good Vedantans. And I think that the less rigorous we are, the more likely it is that we jump to these kinds of conclusions. One of the most rigorous scientists in our order, many of you have probably heard of him. His name is Maharaj, Vidyanathananda. How many of you have heard of him? A few of you. He did his PhD from Berkeley in topology, and he teaches at TIFR, and he's based in our Mumbai ashrama. And whenever people would ask him this question, he would sort of lose his patience. And he would say, look, it's not so simple. And it's to just say that, physics is moving in the direction of it. It might. And if you spent your whole life studying and researching physics at the highest level, he said, and then you also have your whole life been studying and practicing Vedanta, then alone can you be in a position to begin to answer that question. And he gave examples. Schrödinger, he said, as an example of somebody that he greatly admired as a scientist, but also had a spiritual side to him. And he said that if you look, Schrödinger actually did end up making these kinds of speculations, connections between science and spirituality. He said because he earned it. He earned the right to do that. He was Schrödinger, and so he could. I'm not a Schrödinger, so I don't want to say anything facile or superficial about it. Is science maybe in the future, may it move in a direction that's similar to Vedanta? Yes, I think Swami Medhanandaji talked about that again and again. He said that science and religion are just looking at the same reality and explaining it from different standpoints. But has science developed to the point where we can prove that in a rigorous way? No, I don't think so. But I'm not a scientist, so I can't say that for sure. If you are a scientist, I would love to see the proof. But then again, if you showed it to me, I probably wouldn't understand it. Yeah.
But I guess the follow-up question is that, as part of the discussion is, in science, we believe that, the knowledge is really limited by how strong your microscope is, how fine you can look at it, right? So in some sense, the knowledge is always to be revealed, right? There's a certain layer like that you reveal. Is that the same thing with,
Don't we want to give him the mic so that online people can hear? Rajendra is holding it.
Yeah, is that the same? Is that the same way we think?
Repeat the questions for the benefit of the online audience.
So, basically, theories in science are formulated based on the observations, right? And as technology progresses, we have finer observation, see in more detail, and we have to develop new theories which can previous understanding was not enough to explain the new findings. So in some sense, our knowledge is always kind of evolving and getting
Oh, that's controversial because Kuhn, have you heard of Kuhn, Thomas Kuhn? He wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he challenges that and says that, in fact, it's a myth to think that science makes progress. They're just different incommensurable paradigms. But anyway, continue.
So my question in the spiritual world, is the understanding of the reality already done, or is there an evolution in that?
That's interesting. Actually, I'm kind of a Kuhnian about spirituality too, in a sense, what I just said about Kuhn, which is because I think Sri Ramakrishna's parable of the blind man and the elephant, and another one, which some of you, I'm sure you know, the chameleon. One person goes and sees the chameleon as green. Another one goes a few minutes later, sees it as red. Another one is orange. Another one is colorless. They all argue with each other. Different people are touching the same elephant, but they're all blind. One person touching the tail says the elephant's furry. The person touching the trunk, no, you're wrong. The elephant is dry and scaly. And they all fight with each other. So in that sense, I would say I like the view that different ways of looking at ultimate reality. It's not that later spiritual philosophies are somehow more advanced, more evolved than the previous ones. In some sense, you can say that. One thing that I've been arguing in the course of my talk is Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of the divine is broader than past understandings, many past understandings of the divine, broader. And in that sense, progress, I think. Because there's one person who can see the whole elephant and who's not blind. There's one person who can see the chameleon in different colors, the man sitting under the tree in Sri Ramakrishna's parable. That's the Vijnani. The Vijnani has realized God in multiple forms and aspects. So on the basis of his or her own direct spiritual experience, this very expansive understanding of the divine, as Ganesha, Krishna, Christ, Kali, non-dual pure consciousness, Nirvana, and so on and so forth, that person can speak with authority and say that you're all right, but never limit God, the divine, the ultimate, to just that aspect or form of the divine that you've realized. Never make that mistake. So I don't know, does that begin to answer the question?
I guess what I was wondering is that the end, or are there more to be revealed?
Oh, I see. Sri Ramakrishna will never say there's any end. He says, never think that there's an end. Never think that you've understood the whole of God. Another parable. He says, there's an ant. And this ant walks up to a giant hill of sugar. With great difficulty, takes one grain out of those hundreds of thousands of grains of sugar in that hill, that mound, gets puffed up with pride, and says, next time I'm going to go back and take the whole hill with me. Shankara says, don't talk like that. Never say that you have realized the whole of God or that you can realize the whole of God. God is infinite. There's always tar bara ache, tar bara ache. He says there's no limit to spiritual experience. He says this directly in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. There's something beyond Vijnana. Vijnana doesn't mean he's realized 100% of the divine. No, it's not possible. Your head would explode. I don't know. But the point is, you can't. It's impossible. Because you can never place a limit to God. You can never experience the whole of God. And then he says, why do you even need to? He says, to touch the Ganga, do you have to run your finger all the way from the source, all the way down to where it culminates? No. Touch it at any place you've touched God. You've touched the Ganga, which means you realize God in any form or aspect. You've got liberation. Why even lament the fact that you can't know the whole of God? It's a silly thing.
Was he?
Yeah, she had a question here in the front. If you have more, we can come back to you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Mhm.
My name is Jyoti. So I want to ask a question like, so there are so many ways to go to the, get liberation.
Mhm.
So how a person will know that what is the right way or what is the way he should choose
Mhm.
to get into a liberation? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like when I come here, I feel like I don't see any form of the God. It is Narayan, it is Hanumanji, Mahadev.
Well, you see a form here, but
Yeah, I see,
Yeah.
but I feel the
It doesn't
same energy.
resonate. Yeah.
Same
Mm,
energy
mm.
when I go to other temple.
Mhm.
I feel the same energy. I
Mm.
feel that positive energy is
Mm.
touching my body.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I feel that
Mm.
vibrations in my body. So what I think is that my way of reaching God is my devotion or my bhakti in it. So I feel that. But generally, a person, how he knows that what is the way of reaching
Okay,
God.
there are two key things here that I'll say. One, Hinduism has a beautiful concept of Ishta Devata. There's one divine, Ekam Sad, Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, says the most ancient religious scripture in the world, Rig Veda, one of Swami Vivekananda's favorite mantras. Ekam Sad, the divine is one, but sages call it variously, with different names. That's the concept of Ishta Devata. I, because of my past samskaras, latent mental impressions, like to think of the divine, worship the divine as Ganesha, let's say. Right? That doesn't justify me in saying that, oh, you worship God as Kali? That's wrong or that's lower than my path. No. Because that person, that worshiper of Kali or the worshiper of Christ or the worshiper of Allah, worshiping the same God, the same Sat, just by a different name and a different form, you see. So for you, you have to decide what is your Ishta Devata. And that's not it's not even a decision. Ishta Devata in a sense means the Devata chooses you. You see, it's not like I decide. You play the God. You'll be happy to know that I love you in the form of Krishna. Aren't you grateful for my worship? No, this is ridiculous. God chooses us, you see, but we have to let him choose us or her, Okay, that's one thing. Second thing, a beautiful statement made by Swami Medhanandaji. He said, no person is born into a religion. Every person has a religion in the depths of his or her soul. And the first step in spiritual life is to peer into our hearts and discover what that religion is. That individualized, custom-made religion that's just for us, based on our samskaras. You see, there's no the beauty of Hinduism is it's not a one-size-fits-all religion. Instead, it says, in a single Hindu household, many of you are familiar with this from personal experience. There's a mother, there's a father, there might be 3 kids. Each one of them is a good Hindu. One of them is an Advaitan, one of them is a Kali worshiper, one of them worships Ganesha, another one Sri Ramakrishna. They don't quarrel. Maybe there's a single shrine that all of them go to with all the different deities. My mother her shrine just keeps growing. You see, this is the way I like to think about it. Spiritual life is an individual journey, and you have to figure out what floats your boat, in particular, how you like to think of the divine. But never say, my conception of the divine is higher or better than yours. Thank you.
Anybody else left?
Other questions? Yeah, he's got one here, Siddharth.
Okay, I wrote it out. So the earlier question, so how should an aspirant approach the journey from the current state to the desired state, given that the resource of time is scarce? This is what I was trying to say,
right?
Like that training arc.
I see. I think it's similar to the question that this gentleman had. What's your name again?
Mine is Shonak.
Shonak. I think it's similar to Shonak's question about efficiency and which one is, because it depends on the person. The most efficient path for you is going to differ from the most efficient path for her. Does that make sense? There's no such thing as an objectively more better or more efficient path. Yeah. Is that not answering?
I guess like should we look at everything as like an optimization problem? Like are we at the goal yet? Are we at the goal yet? Should I go?
You'll know when you're at the goal. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, he says, when somebody's walking in the forest and the guru tells him, keep going forward. And he sees some nice sandalwood. He's happy with it. He's about to get stuck there. But then he says, wait a minute, my guru said, keep walking forward. Igye chola, igye chola. Then he goes further. And, wow, diamonds. He's about to stop there. He's happy with diamonds, priceless. No, guru said, let me go forward. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, when you finally reach the ultimate goal, you won't even ask that question. You won't ask in your mind, have I reached the goal? You'll know you reached the goal.
Given that I haven't reached the goal, should I look at it similar to like, okay, I have a test. Okay. The best thing I should do for this test is just keep studying and studying and
Oh,
studying.
I see. Look, this is what I say about like, for just very practical advice. The goal is too far off. We're not getting God realization in the next couple of days. Let's be honest. Most of us. Except for the lucky few, one or two of you. All right. So now, I'd like to distinguish the ultimate goal from the proximate goal. Proximate goal is something that's more practical and practicable. Something implementable. Actionable, is the MBA term for this. What is actionable? This is simple, but much more simple, easy to understand. Try to purify your mind as much as possible. Chitta Shuddhi should be the proximate goal. Purify, what does it mean to purify the mind? Try to, as much as possible, eliminate worldly attachments and desires. Because the more you do that, the closer you come to God. That's the number one. Number two, bringing in the three gunas, which is talked about in great detail in the Bhagavad Gita, also in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. You'll find Sri Ramakrishna talk about the gunas all the time, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Another proximate goal. There are two ways of saying the same thing, but both are helpful, just from a practical standpoint. Try to make everything you do and think and say as sattvic as possible. Try to be as sattvic as possible in every walk of life, in every moment of life. That doesn't mean just when you're in the meditation room and you're doing your japa. That is true. You should be sattvic. What is the difference? What does it mean to do spiritual practices in a sattvic way? Let's start with the tamasic way. The tamasic way of doing spiritual practice is what? I start doing my japa. That's tamas. Rajas. What is rajasic way of doing spiritual practice? I'm repeating the mantra and thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch. And why did he say that to me? I'm going to show him rajasic. Sattvic, mind fully concentrated on the divine and on the mantra. Alert, mindful, sattvic. But that's in the meditation room. Let's step outside many people make the mistake of thinking spiritual life is what I do for 5 or 10 minutes or 30 minutes in the meditation room once a day or twice a day. But the rest of the day, I have to raise my kids. I have to go to work. I have to go through rush hour traffic. That's just life. And in that little half hour thing, that's spiritual. No, there's a nonsense. Spiritualize every moment of your life. How do you do it? Make everything you do as sattvic as possible. Another example, let's say you're married. Make your relationship with your spouse or your romantic partner as sattvic as possible. What do I mean by that? Again, let's start with tamas. It's fun to start with it. A tamasic relationship with your romantic partner is what? You neglect your partner. She can go her way, I'll go my way. And when something terrible happens, you don't really care for the person. Selfishness. You're both kind of selfish and you don't care. Rajasic. Unhealthy codependence. Extreme emotional attachment. Clingy. If one partner has to go on a business trip or something for a couple of days, the other person freaks out, doesn't know what to do with him or herself. Unhealthy codependence. Sattvic. You walk side by side. You're not unhealthily clinging to each other. You have your own life, and yet you love and support each other. More sattvic. What about parenting? Many of you have children. What is tamasic parenting? Neglecting your children, not showing up to those football games, not really looking after, making sure that the kid's all right, going on the right path. Oh, the kid I'm a good parent. I just let the kid do whatever he or she wants. That's not good parenting. What's rajasic parenting? I know this very well because I was raised in a Bengali family. And in the US, they call it helicopter parenting. And they of course, my parents were not, that's not fair to my parents. One thing that's true about my parents, especially my dad, is that typically Bengali and expecting you to go into science stream if you're a good student and be a computer scientist or a doctor, something respectable, not something like philosophy, God forbid. So, but anyway, but there's some parents who think that good parenting is helicopter parenting. Micromanage every aspect of your child's life, obsessing over every, and having very specific ideas of what success consists in, and telling your kid, drilling into your kid at every opportunity. This alone is success. You have to do this. Otherwise, you're going to be a failure in life. That's Rajasic parenting. What's Sattvic parenting? Giving your kid space, letting your kid grow in his or her own way, understanding that kid's individual temperament, supporting that kid, not neglecting, supporting the kid on his or her path, and not being selfish. See, another aspect of Rajasic parenting is there's a certain kind of ego and selfishness in the parent, in wanting to create the kid in his or her own image. In Sattvic parenting, you don't find that. Anyway, these are examples. What about watching movies? Rajasic movies are most Hollywood movies, for instance, full of sex and violence and this and that, stimulates the lower self, the lower impulses. Sattvic films, there are plenty. Satyajit Ray, Pothai Panchali, many great classic films by Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish filmmaker, Andrei Tarkovsky, Bela Tarr, many others. And music, Sattvic music, classical music, a lot of classical music is highly Sattvic, either in India or in the West. There's a whole genre of Western classical music called sacred classical music, because many of the great composers were Christians. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, and so on. Arvo Pärt's one of my favorite contemporary composers. Beautiful Sattvic music. That'll elevate you and uplift you. And just run a test on yourself. Listen to like a Billboard top 10 right now, whether it's Rihanna or something. I'm not putting anyone down. I'm just saying, run the test. Listen to the 5-minute song, the pop song. How does it make you feel? And what do you want to do afterward? And then a different time of day, maybe even a different day, because that'll be stuck in your head the whole day. Listen to some classical music. Now, the thing is, this is tricky because if you're not like used to listening to classical music, it might put you to sleep. And that's not a fair. See, the thing about Sattvic things is that it's not always easy to appreciate them. Krishna says in chapter 18 of the Gita that Sattvic things are like poison in the beginning and like nectar in the end through repeated practice. Spiritual practice is like that. In the beginning, it's mechanical, it's drudgery. Eventually, it becomes like nectar. So same thing goes. You develop a taste for things like classical music, for high art. Once you develop it, listen to a song. How does that make you feel? Bach's Mass in B minor, Arvo Pärt's Berliner Messe, any number of things. Mozart's Mass in C minor, Palestrina. It's qualitatively different. The kind of joy you feel, the upliftment you feel is qualitatively different from the happiness you get from pop music. Pop music definitely makes you happy. But what's being gratified? Things that are Rajasic gratify the body-mind complex. Things that are Sattvic gratify the deeper soul within. Atma Buddhi Prasadajam is the term used in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 18. Sattvika joy is born of the satisfaction of the higher mind, the Buddhi, and the Atman, the deeper eternal soul within. So try to make every single thing you do, how you interact with other people, how you behave at work with your co-workers, how you do your work. Are you doing it as karma yoga, or is there a lot of ego involved in the work? How you interact with your loved ones, how you engage in spiritual practices. Try to make everything as sattvic as possible. That, I would suggest, is a much more actionable, practical kind of aim in our day-to-day spiritual life. Again, unless we have, let's give someone else a chance before coming back to anyone else. Yeah.
Oh, someone.
Any other questions?
Oh.
Okay. Yes.
Maharaj, this
Anandji.
is a very basic question.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand. I'm confused because there was a satsang with Ramana Maharshi, and a devotee started explaining his vision.
A devotee explaining his mission.
Vision, the devotee's vision.
Can you stop whispering, please? Because it's difficult to hear. Hello? Excuse me. Please stop. Thank you. Yeah.
So,
or you can talk outside if you want. Yeah.
He was explaining to Ramana Maharshi about his vision.
Yeah.
And Ramana Maharshi said, it is perceived by your mind and put in your memory, recall the memory. And he explained that is all false. What is perceived by the mind, retained in the memory, then get it out, it's all false.
Yeah.
So we come across lot of visions in
Hmm.
Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna.
Yes.
How do we understand these things?
Yeah. Yeah, they're different paradigms. Ramana Maharshi's paradigm is the paradigm of classical Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, which I explained in the beginning of my talk. And Sri Ramakrishna's paradigm is the Vijnana Vedanta paradigm, which accepts these visions as fully real. I have a whole chapter on this in this book. It's chapter 5. Of course, when I say this, it's an academic book, so just a disclaimer and a warning. Don't expect this to be a walk in the park. Okay, so in chapter 5, I talk about both these views, the Ramana Maharshi kind of view, which is that these are all kind of hallucinations or mental projections. I say that Sri Ramakrishna gives us a new paradigm, which is breathtakingly original and which makes a very important contribution to philosophical discussions of mystical experience. What's the view? I call it manifestationism. Instead of thinking of these different visions of God as subjective projections or mental projections, as Ramana Maharshi suggests, Sri Ramakrishna says, think about it from the standpoint of the divine. Let's say I'm a Christian mystic and I'm engaged in intense Christian mystical spiritual practices. Then I have this vision of Christ. The way Sri Ramakrishna will explain this is God, the infinite divine, lovingly manifests to that Christian mystic in the form of Christ. Because God is what? Bhakta Bhatshal. That's the term used in the gospel, the Bengali term. It means God is a lover of his devotees. That's why I say lovingly manifests. And see, manifestation doesn't have a whiff of this hallucination, illusion, any of this. But it accounts for the same experience. You see what I mean? Ramana Maharshi will explain the Christian mystic's experience, the vision of Christ as it's a mental projection, not real from the ultimate standpoint. Sri Ramakrishna will say, no, God lovingly manifests to the Christian mystic as Christ. God equally lovingly manifests to the Vaishnava as Krishna. God equally lovingly manifests to the Muslim as Allah. Each of those visions are real. They're all just genuinely realizing different aspects and forms of the same divine. That's why I think that Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta philosophical paradigm is so much richer and broader than Ramana Maharshi's classical Advaita Vedanta paradigm.
Is transcendental real, non-transcendental not real, false?
Again, that's true from the standpoint of Shankara's philosophy and not true from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy. On my interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna. But there are multiple. And I have the whole survey of multiple interpretations in chapter 1 of this book. Some people try to pigeonhole Sri Ramakrishna into the classical Advaitic mold and say he's a follower of Shankara. Others say, no, he was a Vishishtadvaitan. You know who says he was a Vishishtadvaitan? M himself. Very interesting. Only those who know Bangla will know that because Niklanji omits it from the English translation. But M, in the original Bengali Kathamrita, actually says, Sri Ramakrishna was not a follower of Shankara. He was not a Mayavadi because he didn't dismiss this world as unreal. I think he was a follower of Ramanuja because he saw the world as a real manifestation of God. That's why Sri Ramakrishna used the analogy of a bale fruit. If you only take the pulp and not the outside stuff, the weight of the bale fruit falls short. M gives this example to justify his Ramanujite interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna. Other people interpret him as a tantric. So there's so many interpretations. I say, don't pigeonhole him at all. Just as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, don't put a limit to God. Why are we always trying to impose limits on Sri Ramakrishna? So the only way to avoid imposing a limit on Sri Ramakrishna is to accept that his philosophy is universal and non-sectarian. I call that philosophy Vijnana Vedanta. Another mistake that some people make is to think that I'm starting a new Ramakrishna sect. This is nonsense. It shows that you haven't read the book. Swami Vivekananda himself described our tradition in a very interesting and paradoxical way. You know what he said? Our tradition is a non-sectarian sect. Non-sectarian sect. That's Vijnana Vedanta. It's a sect in the sense that it has concrete doctrines. Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. You cannot place a limit to God. The world is a real manifestation of Shakti. All four yogas are direct paths to the same goal of liberation. These are concrete doctrines. In that sense, non-sectarian because you have to have these concrete universal doctrines to harmonize all of the different sects that we find within Vedanta, within Hinduism, throughout the world. You see, this is the way I see it.
I guess I'll ask the last. Oh, chair.
Oh, there's one back there,
Someone
actually.
there?
Let's
Okay.
yeah, he's new
All
too,
right.
so I think we should give him a chance. And tell me your name first.
Yeah, my name's Josh.
Hi, Josh.
I had a question as long as we're talking about the different incarnations.
Hmm.
I was wondering how we should look forward to the next incarnation with Kalki. How we should maybe view that.
Well, who
especially
knows
with,
whether Kalki is the next, or even Sri Ramakrishna mysteriously pointed in one direction and said, in something like 150 years, I will come again as a bowel sometimes. I mean, there are different accounts of this. So it gets confusing. But what are you asking about Kalki?
Oh, anyways, with Kalki, just with, the way the world looks right now, it seems, things seem to be ramped up for a lot of people. So I was just wondering, do you have any?
I see.
Do you have any clue?
We need another
on,
incarnation. Is that
do you have any clue on maybe a timeline?
Do I have a what? Sorry, what's the last thing?
A clue on the timeline? Maybe,
I have no
maybe
clue.
a peak, just a peak.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could say yes, but I'm not that evolved, I guess. I don't have a hotline with God. Hey, why don't you come again? We need you in Gaza and elsewhere. Anyway, yeah. But sorry, it's a good question. I just don't have the answer. Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of the things you already covered, but I still want to ask you.
But she's got a question, by the way. But but first you ask yours.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Namaste. What's your name?
Namaste, Swamiji. Srilata is my name.
Srilata.
So for someone who follows the strict Jnana Yoga principles and for, they believe this Jagat is mithya. Where does prayer fit in? Or do you just let that go and then become a fatalist to where you think, oh, this is just my karma and it's all unreal and you don't put in effort. You don't put in prayer because you don't have that relationship with that issue.
I mean, it's a good question. As I said, it depends. I mean, if you want to follow Shankara, you shouldn't be practicing prayer at the same time that you're practicing the path of knowledge, because he says that the same spiritual aspirant should not be practicing bhakti yoga and jnana yoga simultaneously. And I explain why. Do you remember? The reason is because one person is identified with the body-mind complex. That person alone is eligible for bhakti yoga because they don't have sufficiently pure minds. But if you think that you're eligible for jnana yoga, which is what? That means that you've almost completely transcended body consciousness. This is not me saying it. Shankara says it and Sri Ramakrishna says it. He says, if you're pricked and you're gushing blood, and in that moment you can say, I don't feel any pain. It's the body that's in pain, but I'm completely free from all this suffering. Only then are you qualified to practice Advaita Vedanta, which means you have to be free from body consciousness. The same person cannot be full of body consciousness and devoid of body consciousness. That's the logic behind Shankara saying that you should not be practicing Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga at the same time. Now, if you accept Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta, you can happily, to your heart's content, practice both Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga and Dhyana Yoga. That's why we don't have the insignia here, do we? The one that Swami Medhanandaji sketched out, which is the emblem of our order. Wavy waters, signifying Karma Yoga. Lotus, signifying Bhakti Yoga. Cobra, signifying Raja Yoga. Sun, representing Jnana Yoga. Swan, the Paramahamsa, the Atman, the Paramatman. Through all of these yogas, through one or more or all of these, we can attain the realization of our true spiritual nature. And Swami Vivekananda used to say, even though you can attain the highest through any of these four yogas, better to try to combine all four. But again, that doesn't make any sense from the standpoint of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. If you don't believe me, read the commentaries. Yes, now we can come to Radhanandaji. Yes, please.
Well, you mentioned about Jnan and Vijnana. Now, classical Sankarite explanation is Jnana is intellectual understanding and Vijnana is realization of what you understood.
Yeah.
How will you respond to that?
Right. So I think you're thinking of Shankara's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, because there the terms Jnana and Vijnana are used. Very interesting. And they're a bit cryptic. Krishna does not directly define these terms Jnana and Vijnana. So what Shankara does is, he defines them in this way, usually. He says, simple. Jnana means intellectual knowledge of the Atman through the scriptures. Like when we read the Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita, we have some kind of intellectual understanding. We haven't realized God, but we have an intellectual understanding. And this Vijnana is the direct spiritual experience or realization of the Atman, that distinction. Now, if you want real rigorous detail, I have an article on this with the long-winded academic title, Toward a New Hermeneutics of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Aurobindo, and the Secret of Vijnana, where I talk about this. But I'll just give you a very short capsule summary. Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary on the Gita, called Essays on the Gita, he gives a totally different way of understanding the terms Jnana and Vijnana in the Gita. By reinterpreting the scripture in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, it's a certain irony, in a sense, that the first person to have, in a really bold and systematic way, began to interpret the Vedantic scriptures in the light of life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna was not a monk of our order. It's Sri Aurobindo, somebody in a different tradition, a related tradition, but not in our order. And we usually just use Shankara. That's strange. That's why I love his commentary. I use that as my main textbook in my own Gita class. So what does he say? He says, if you look at the context of the Gita's teachings on Jnana and Vijnana, what you'll find is that they correspond to different stages of spiritual experience. And he even points to, in chapter 18, Brahma bhutaha prasannatmana shochina kankshati samasarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim lavate param. First, you become Brahma bhuta. You become one with Brahman. That's Jnana. That's knowledge of your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. Then he says what? Mad bhaktim lavate param is the subsequent step. You attain supreme bhakti for Krishna. Interesting. Bhakti follows. What kind of bhakti is this that follows Advaita Jnana? It's Vijnana. And so then the question is, well, how do we know that Shankara's interpretation is worse than Sri Ramakrishna's or Sri Aurobindo's? Context. So now prove it. We can come up with any interpretation. I can say that Gita is about Martians eating spaghetti. How do you disprove me? Because the first question you'll ask me, which sloka talks about Martians and spaghetti? We can do that with Shankara's interpretation. Show me where in the Gita itself, Jnana is described as intellectual knowledge of the Atman, and show me where Vijnana is understood as spiritual realization. Or is it more plausible to take both Jnana and Vijnana as different kinds of spiritual experience? That would be Sri Aurobindo's and the Ramakrishnan kind of argument. I'll leave it to each of you to decide.
Right. And how will you tie this to Jiva Koti and Ishwar Koti concept, which is pretty well not anywhere that I have found except.
Yeah, that's a great question. So see, in the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna distinguishes two categories of jiva, soul. Jiva Koti, ordinary souls. Ishvara Kotis, he defines it very precisely. Ishvara Koti is avatar ba avatarar angsho, incarnations of God, or those born as parts of an incarnation, as a part of an incarnation. And what he often says is, ordinary souls, when they attain the state of jnana, they leave their body in the state of nirvikapa samadhi within 21 days. Due to lack of food, due to lack of nourishment. They don't come back. He says, but Ishvara Kotis are capable of attaining a further state of vijnana. They can come back from the state of nirvikapa samadhi, and then they see this entire world as a manifestation of God. Okay. So you were asking about Jiva Koti and Ishvara Koti, and then in relation to, the Gita. So I want to bring it back to the Gita.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chapter 7 of the Gita. Sri Aurobindo, I think this is one of his most brilliant strokes. 7.2 introduces the terms Jnana and Vijnana for the second time. They come up in chapter 3, Jnana Vijnana Nashanam, and then in chapter 7 it comes up again. Jnanam teham savijnanam idam vakshami sheshaha. Then Sri Aurobindo says, how do we understand what Jnana and Vijnana means in 7.2? Let's look at 7.3. What's 7.3? Manushanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mambeti tatvataha. Among hundreds of thousands of people, manushanam sahasreshu kaschid, a few people, yatati siddhaye, strive for siddhi, for perfection, spiritual perfection. Now we get to the interesting problematic part of the shloka, or cryptic part. Yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mambeti tatvataha. Even among those strivers who have attained siddhi, who have attained perfection, yatatam siddhanam, they're siddhas now. Kaschin mam veti tatvataha. Only a tiny subset of that already tiny minority realize me. This is extremely interesting because Sri Aurobindo says the only way to understand this is that there are two distinct stages of spiritual realization, or three really. Or, okay, it goes like this. One is I'm a spiritual aspirant. I haven't realized anything yet. But I'm yatati siddhaye. I'm striving for perfection. How many people in the world are attending this talk and are spiritual aspirants? Very few. There are many billions of people. How many are spiritual aspirants? Extremely few. In all religions, in all spiritual paths. Right? That's what the first line of the 7.3 says. Next line is more interesting. Yatatam api siddhanam. The first stage in realization is realization of the non-dual Atman. Brahma Bhuta, that's what the Gita calls it. Becoming one with non-dual Brahman. And then Krishna says, Yatatamapi siddhanam kaschin mam veti tata. Even among, there's a tiny subset of those who have attained jnana, go on to realize me and my comprehensive nature. Only a tiny minority go from the stage of jnana to vijnana. This is Sri Aurobindo's interpretation, but the idea is that this can be easily mapped onto this Ishvara Koti and Jiva Koti thing. Because this Yatatamapi siddhanam would refer to those who have attained Brahma Jnana, knowledge of Brahman. They've attained knowledge, but they stop there because they're ordinary jivas. But then there's a tiny minority of people who have attained jnana, but then can go on to attain an even further stage of spiritual experience called vijnana. Kaschin mam veti tatvataha, Krishna says.
If I can ask one more last question. The concept of Advaita Vedanta of Ramakrishna.
Oh, Ramakrishna.
Advaita, integral Advaita of Vivekananda, and integral yoga of Aurobindo. All these three, how different are they? And second, most important, how are they different from Kashmir Shaivism?
Oh my goodness, this is a huge. This is like 5 different classes or lectures. All right, I'm going to be very succinct here. Okay, I've already written 2 books, so read those books first. So do your homework, and then okay. So because the idea is, I've written 2 books. This is here. I see these 3 books, okay, as what I call my integral Advaita trilogy. You say, where's the 3rd book? It's not written yet. It's half written. Okay, but first book in my integral Advaita trilogy, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. It's a philosophical study of Sri Ramakrishna. Okay, why do I call it integral Advaita? Because he used to say, I teach Advaita. Shob jodiye ekti. Shob jodiye ekti. It's an all-encompassing oneness. The bale fruit, you have to take the whole bale fruit. Everything, individual souls, the world of names and forms, the personal God, Brahman, everything is real. Okay, in that sense, integral Advaita, all-encompassing Advaita. Swami Vivekananda, I call his philosophy, he taught nothing but Advaita Vedanta in the West especially, but also in India. What kind of Advaita was that? This is a huge question in the scholarship. Most scholars lean toward, and even monks think that he's teaching Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. In chapter 2 of my next book, which I don't have with me, but which some of you might get signed tomorrow, Swami Vivekananda's Vedanta Cosmopolitanism. It's a philosophical study of Swami Vivekananda. I argue that his Advaita Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda's Advaita Vedanta, comes closer to Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta than to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Why? Because Swami Vivekananda again and again accepts the reality of Shakti from the ultimate standpoint, instead of saying it's an inferior reality or only true from the empirical standpoint. He says things like impersonality includes all personalities. He says this in a number of lectures. This is something that Shankara would never say. Shankara will rather say impersonality excludes all personalities. Impersonality transcends all personalities. He grants provisional reality to the personal God, but ultimate, that's all from the standpoint of ignorance, you see. What about the world? What does Swamiji say? He gave an entire lecture called God and Everything, based on a new interpretation of the Isha Upanishad. Isha vasimidam sarvam yat kinchit. Everything in this world is nothing but God. Open your eyes and see it, is what Swami Vivekananda used to say. Sometimes deviating from Shankara. The second line of the first mantra of the Isha Upanishad, hugely problematic to Shankara. Tena tyaktena bhunjitha. Through renunciation, you should enjoy. What in the world does that mean? What does it mean? You either enjoy the world or you renounce the world. You don't enjoy through renunciation. That doesn't make any sense. So what does Shankara say? Even though the word usually means enjoy, it can't mean enjoy in this context. It has to mean protect. But grammatically, it's very hard to justify that based on Paninian grammar. And then there's another question of, well, what's being protected? There's no direct object to protection there. So he has to supply one. He says it's implied, Atman. Through renunciation, protect the Atman. If this isn't text torturing, I don't know what is. What does Swami Vivekananda say? In his God and Everything lecture delivered in 1896 in London, he says, simple. This mantra is saying, enjoy this world through renunciation, through the inner renunciation of desire and egoism. You can enjoy everything in this world. How? As a manifestation of God. How can you not enjoy this world if you see nothing but God? If you see God in everyone and in everything and as everything, how can you not but be in bliss? True enjoyment. This is not worldly enjoyment. This is divine enjoyment. This is what the Isha Upanishad is talking about, according to Swami Vivekananda. So that's Swami Vivekananda. 3rd book, which has not been written yet, but I've signed a contract with Oxford for it. And I promised them I'd submit a book manuscript by the end of 2027. So I've got a long time because I'm very busy with other things. So anyway, the 3rd book in this Integral Advaita trilogy will be on Sri Aurobindo. tentatively titled An All-Embracing Oneness. Again, notice, Integral Advaita. Shab Jodi Ekti. An All-Embracing Oneness, Sri Aurobindo's Integral Advaita, and the Legacy of Sri Ramakrishna. And overall, cumulatively, what I'm arguing in these three books is that these three great mystics and philosophers have developed a new school of integral Advaita within the tradition of Vedantic philosophy. And most people have not appreciated that, and that they belong to the same spiritual and philosophical lineage. Now, belonging to the same lineage doesn't mean that they're saying exactly the same thing. There are subtle differences. For the subtle differences, please read my books. That's the whole point of writing academic books, nuance and rigor and subtlety. And it would take way too long for me to explain what those differences are. But the more important thing is they belong to the same lineage. Just because you have a brother and sister and parents, that doesn't mean everybody looks the same, and right? Similar genes, there's some overlap in genetics, but you're all distinct and unique. That's true of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Medhanandaji, and Sri Aurobindo. But overall, I think they're doing something wonderfully new and important. That's extremely urgent for us to understand. They're developing a new non-sectarian and harmonizing school of integral Advaita within Vedantic thought, which this world desperately needs.
And the last part of the question was,
Kashmir Shaivism,
right.
the second can of worms or third can of worms. Oh my goodness. All right. Kashmir Shaivism. One thing Sarvapyanji is fond of saying, because we have a mutual friend, Sarvapyanji. I'm friends with Sarvapyanji, but we have a common friend. His name is Arindam Chakraborty. He's a great scholar of Indian philosophy, good friend of both of ours. And Arindam would often say, he says, if you want to understand the teachings in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, better to study Kashmir Shaivism than to study Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. And Sarvapyanji approvingly quotes this statement of Arindam's,
Right.
which is interesting because sometimes Sarvapyanji seems to interpret Sri Ramakrishna's teachings more in a kind of Shankaran framework. But I think he's moving toward the view that you can't really limit Sri Ramakrishna to Shankara's framework because there's too much that can't be explained from Shankara's standpoint. His teachings, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, Brahman and Shakti are inseparable. Impossible to explain from Shankara's standpoint. Easily explicable from the standpoint of Kashmir Shaivism. Because according to Kashmir Shaivism, the ultimate reality is Prakasha Vimarshamaya, which means it's equally Nirguna Brahman and Shakti. Shiva Shakti, Abheda. Almost exactly the same language. What about this world? Kashmir Shaivism says the world's not an illusion. It's a manifestation of Shiva. It's an ecstatic manifestation of the divine. Exactly like Sri Ramakrishna says, the Vijnani sees that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. And there are other similarities between Kashmir Shaivism and Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy. There are also dissimilarities. One of them I would say is, if you study the original Kashmir Shaivite texts, Pratyabhijna Hridayam, Abhinavagupta, and these other things, you'll find lots of hierarchies there too. There are hierarchies in Shankara, there are also hierarchies in Kashmir Shaivism. They don't say other philosophies are false, they put them on a lower footing. There's this concept, a fancy term used by philosophers and scholars called doxography. This is a very common practice in medieval India. And it's also done by Kashmir Shaivites, classical Advaitins. What do? They publish whole books explaining different schools of Indian philosophy, arranged hierarchically, usually starting with Charvaka, materialism, the view that we are the body, the Vedas are the ravings of lunatics. This is literally the language used by these Charvaka materialists, Lokayata materialists. And then what happens is, according to doxography means hierarchical arrangement of different thought paradigms from lower to high, lowest to highest. And let's say next step, Buddhism, then Jainism, and then, because these are also beyond the pale, they're non-Hindu and all that, non-Vedic. Then you get to the Vedic philosophies, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Lo and behold, what's the highest philosophy? The person who's writing the book, the philosophy of the person who's writing the book. So if it's a classical Advaitin, Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. If it's a Kashmir Shaivite, Kashmir Shaivism is at the pinnacle of this Mount Everest. You see, this is called doxography. Everybody's giving these different hierarchical schemes with their philosophy, lo and behold, being the highest standpoint. You see, Kashmir Shaivites do the same thing in their texts. They say our philosophy is the best and the highest. Your philosophies are stepping stones toward mine. And Sri Ramakrishna doesn't do that. So that's a dissimilarity, I think. That's in a nutshell. Thank you. I mean, I could go on, but
all right, that's good.
Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Thank you for the thought-provoking discussion. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. And I hope to see you guys tomorrow for another talk on the journey of faith, followed by book signing. Jai Ma.
Anand is gone. He's outside.
Probably what time?
We have some prasad. We have some prasad for you at